She was just doing her job when the millionaire's wife suddenly grabbed her uniform and ripped it right in front of everyone. But no one in the house was ready for how the millionaire reacted next. Stay with me, because this story will leave you stunned. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's dive in. The morning started like any other at the Harrison estate. 26-year-old Maya Thompson moved quietly through the marble hallways, her footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed to shine even in her simple gray uniform. Maya had been working as a housekeeper for the Harrison family for 8 months now, and she had learned to navigate the intricate world of wealth with careful grace. The estate itself was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to stretch toward heaven. Persian rugs adorned floors that gleamed like mirrors. Every piece of furniture whispered stories of old money and careful taste. But beneath all that beauty, tensions simmered like water about to boil. Maya came from humble beginnings. Raised by her grandmother in a small apartment across town, she had worked 2 jobs while studying business at night school. When the position at the Harrison estate opened up, she saw it as more than just work. It was a stepping stone toward the future she dreamed of building. She approached every task with quiet determination, whether it was arranging flowers in the grand foyer or preparing afternoon tea service. The Harrison family consisted of 3 people, each carrying their own weight, built his fortune through smart investments and careful business decisions. In the household dynamics, Richard Harrison, the patriarch, Shay 42, he possessed the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth without needing to prove it to anyone. His dark eyes hell couldn't quite fill. Then there was hissed wisdom, but also a loneliness, that money wife, Victoria Harrison. Blonde, beautiful, and sharp as a blade, she had married into wealth and wore it like armor. Victoria came from old society money herself, and she understood the unspoken rules of their world better than anyone. She knew which charity galas to attend, which designer to wear, and exactly how to maintain the family's pristine reputation. But Victoria also understood something else. She recognized when someone threatened the careful order she had spent years constructing. The 3rd member of the household was 12-year-old Emma Harrison, Richard's daughter from his first marriage. Emma was a bright child, with curious eyes and a heart that hadn't yet learned to build walls. She treated Maya with the kind of genuine kindness that made the work feel less like duty and more like purpose. From the very beginning, Maya noticed how Richard's eyes would linger when she served morning coffee or arranged documents in his study. It wasn't inappropriate, but there was something in his gaze that made her heart race in ways she tried to ignore. He spoke to her differently than the other staff members. Where others received polite nods and brief instructions, Maya found herself engaged in conversations about books, current events, even her opinions on art pieces in the house. These moments worried Maya more than she cared to admit. She had seen enough of the world to know that admiration between different social classes rarely ended well for the person with less power. So she kept her responses respectful but distant, always mindful of the invisible lines that separated their worlds. Victoria Harrison was not blind to these exchanges. She watched every interaction with the sharp attention of a hawk circling its prey. Victoria had built her entire identity around being the perfect wife to a successful man, and she would not allow anyone to threaten that position, especially not a housekeeper who seemed to forget her place. The trouble started small, as these things often do. Victoria began finding fault with Maya's work in ways that felt personal rather than professional. The flowers weren't arranged quite right. The silver needed more polishing. Maya's uniform looked wrinkled even when it was freshly pressed. Each criticism came with a smile that never reached Victoria's eyes, delivered in a tone that sounded sweet but carried venom underneath. Maya endured these moments with the same quiet grace she brought to everything else. She would nod politely, apologize even when no apology was needed, and simply work harder. But inside, She felt the weight of being constantly watched and judged for reasons that had nothing to do with her actual performance. The other staff members began to notice the tension as well. Mrs. Chen, the elderly cook who had worked for the family for 15 years, would shake her head sadly when Victoria's voice carried from the dining room. Thomas, the groundskeeper, started offering Maya encouraging smiles when their paths crossed in the hallways. Even little Emma seemed to sense that something was wrong, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late September. The Harrisons were hosting a dinner party for some of Richard's business associates and their wives. It was the kind of event Victoria lived for, a chance to showcase their home, their status, and her skills as the perfect hostess. The dining room had been transformed into something that belonged in a magazine. Candles flickered on the long mahogany table, casting warm light on crystal glasses and fine china. Maya had spent hours helping prepare for the evening. She had polished every piece of silver until it gleamed, arranged fresh orchids in tall vases, and pressed the linen napkins into perfect squares. Her uniform was spotless, her hair neatly pinned back, and she moved through the evening's service with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark. The guests were impressive, the kind of people whose names appeared in business journals and society pages. Conversations flowed around topics of stock portfolios, charity foundations, and upcoming vacations to places Maya had only seen in travel magazines. She served each course with careful attention, ensuring water glasses stayed filled and plates were cleared at precisely the right moments. Everything seemed to be going perfectly until the moment it wasn't. Maya was clearing dessert plates from the table, moving with the same careful grace she had maintained all evening. The guests were engaged in animated conversation about a recent art auction, their voices creating a pleasant hum in the candlelit room. That's when Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. The words she spoke would change everything that followed, setting in motion events that no one in that room could have predicted. The elegant dinner party was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would reveal the true character of everyone involved. As Maya reached for the final plate, completely unaware of what was about to unfold, the weight of months of tension was about to explode in a way that would leave the entire household questioning everything they thought they knew about power, dignity, and what it truly means to stand up for what's right. The silence that was about to fill that dining room would be the kind that changes everything forever. Victoria Harrison rose from her chair with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting every movement for maximum impact. Her champagne silk dress caught the candlelight as she moved, creating an almost ethereal glow around her figure. But there was nothing heavenly about the expression on her face. Maya, Victoria's voice carried across the dining room with crystalline clarity. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every fork paused halfway to waiting lips. The sudden shift in atmosphere was so complete that even the candle flames seemed to flicker in response. Maya looked up from the plate she was holding, her dark eyes wide with confusion. She had done nothing wrong, said nothing out of turn, yet something in Victoria's tone made her stomach clench with dread. "Come here, please," Victoria continued, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. The please was delivered like a weapon wrapped in silk. Maya set down the plate with trembling hands and stepped forward. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room following her movement. The business associates and their wives had gone completely still, sensing drama but not yet understanding its nature. This was the kind of moment that would be whispered about at country clubs for months to come. Richard Harrison sat at the head of the table, his jaw tightening as he watched his wife with growing concern. He knew that look in Victoria's eyes, had seen it before when she felt threatened or challenged, but never had he seen it directed at someone so defenseless. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced to the room, her voice carrying the practiced projection of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I believe we're witnessing something quite remarkable tonight. Our help seems to have forgotten her place entirely." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. seeping into every corner of the room. She wanted to ask what she had done wrong, wanted to defend herself, but years of working in houses like this had taught her that sometimes silence was the only shield available. "Victoria," Richard's voice carried a warning tone that made several guests glance nervously between husband and wife. Perhaps this conversation should wait until after dinner, but Victoria was beyond listening to reason. Months of watching her husband's eyes follow Maya through their home had built to this moment. Every polite conversation Richard had shared with the young woman, every smile he had offered, every instance where he had treated Maya like a human being rather than invisible help, had fed Victoria's growing resentment. "No, darling," Victoria replied sweetly, never taking her eyes off Maya. "I think our guests should see exactly what kind of staff we've been harboring in our home. The kind who think they can dress up and play at being something they're not." Maya's uniform was the same gray dress she wore every day, pressed and clean and entirely appropriate. But standing there under Victoria's withering gaze, she felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with clothing. Mrs. Patterson, the wife of Richard's business partner, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had employed countless housekeepers over the years and had never seen one treated with such public cruelty. The young woman standing before them carried herself with more dignity than many society ladies Mrs. Patterson knew. "Victoria, please," Richard tried again, his voice tighter now. He could see the hurt blooming in Maya's eyes, could feel the uncomfortable tension radiating from their guests. This dinner party was supposed to cement important business relationships, not destroy them with unnecessary drama. But Victoria Harrison had spent too many sleepless nights imagining threats to her carefully constructed world. She had married Richard, not just for love, but for security, for status, for the life his money could provide. The thought of losing any of that to a young woman with kind eyes and genuine warmth had driven her past the point of rational thought. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Victoria asked Maya, circling her like a predator. "I see someone who has forgotten that this is not your home. These are not your people. This is not your world." Maya's hands clenched at her sides, but she kept her voice steady. "I know my place, Mrs. Harrison. I've never forgotten it. Haven't you?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Then why do you walk through my halls like you belong here? Why do you speak to my husband like you're equals? Why do you look at my life like you could ever be part of it?" The questions hit Maya like physical blows. She had been so careful, so professional, so respectful of every boundary, yet somehow her very existence had become a threat in Victoria's mind. Young Emma Harrison appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Her 12-year-old eyes took in the scene with growing alarm. Maya had helped her with homework just yesterday, had listened patiently as Emma practiced her piano pieces. Now the woman who had shown her such kindness was standing in the middle of the dining room, looking like she might cry. "Mom?" Emma's voice was small and confused. "What's happening?" "Go to your room, Emma," Richard commanded, his voice harder than his daughter had ever heard it. He could see where this was heading and didn't want his child to witness what was about to unfold. But Emma didn't move. Something in her young heart recognized injustice when she saw it, even if she didn't fully understand the adult complexities at play. Victoria's smile grew wider and more dangerous. She had an audience now, witnesses to establish once and for all the natural order of their household. With deliberate slowness, she reached out and grasped the collar of Maya's uniform. "Let me remind you," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "Exactly what you are in this house." The fabric was sturdy cotton, designed to withstand the daily wear of honest work. But under Victoria's manicured fingers, it began to tear with a sound that seemed to echo off the dining room walls like thunder. The ripping noise continued for what felt like eternity, exposing Maya's shoulder and the simple white camisole underneath. Maya gasped and stumbled backward, clutching the torn edges of her uniform to her chest. Tears of humiliation sprang to her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. The dining room had gone completely silent, except for the sound of Maya's ragged breathing. Several of the women at the table looked away in embarrassment, while the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This had crossed every line of decency and civility. Emma Harrison let out a small cry from the doorway, her young mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. The Maya she knew was kind and gentle, someone who never deserved such cruelty. And then Richard Harrison stood up. The chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound that cut through the silence like a gunshot. Richard Harrison rose slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding with deliberate precision. Every eye in the room turned to him, waiting to see how the master of the house would respond to his wife's shocking display. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Richard said nothing. His dark eyes moved from his wife's flushed face to Maya's torn uniform, then to the faces of his dinner guests, who sat frozen in uncomfortable silence. The weight of his gaze seemed to press down on the entire room. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable authority of a man who had built empires with his words. Victoria. The single word hung in the air like a judgment. Victoria's triumphant expression began to waver. She had expected support, or at least silent acceptance of her actions. Instead, she saw something in her husband's eyes that made her stomach turn cold. "What you have just done," Richard continued, his voice growing steadier with each word, "is unforgivable." A collective intake of breath rippled through the dining room. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her pearl necklace. Mr. Westbrook nearly choked on his wine. No one had expected this turn of events. Victoria's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Richard, you don't understand. She's been—" "No." Richard's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "You don't understand. Maya Thompson is not just an employee in this house. She is a human being who deserves respect and dignity, something you have completely failed to provide." Maya stood motionless, clutching her torn uniform, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She had never expected anyone to defend her, least of all the man whose wife had just humiliated her in front of a room full of strangers. Richard moved around the table with measured steps until he stood directly in front of Maya. Without hesitation, he removed his own dinner jacket, a perfectly tailored piece that probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months. With gentle hands, he draped it around her shoulders, shielding her from the staring eyes. "I am profoundly sorry," he said to Maya, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "No one should ever be treated the way you were just treated, especially not in my home." Emma Harrison took a tentative step into the room, her young face streaked with tears. She had never seen adults behave this way, had never witnessed such cruelty followed by such kindness. The confusion on her face was heartbreaking. Richard turned back to face the room, his protective stance in front of Maya unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must ask you to forgive this unfortunate interruption to our evening. My wife has clearly forgotten herself tonight." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The public rejection of her actions was worse than any private argument they could have had. Her carefully constructed image as the perfect society wife was crumbling before her eyes. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "How dare you embarrass me in front of our guests for some common housekeeper?" Richard's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "The only person who has been embarrassed here tonight is Maya, and the person responsible for that embarrassment is you." Mr. Westbrook cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should call it an evening," he suggested, already reaching for his wife's hand. The other guests began murmuring their agreements, eager to escape the toxic atmosphere that had consumed what should have been an elegant dinner party. But Richard wasn't finished. He had spent months watching his wife's subtle cruelties toward Maya, choosing to ignore them in the name of keeping peace. Tonight had shown him the cost of that silence. "Before anyone leaves," Richard announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I want you all to know something about the woman whose dignity was just assaulted in front of you." Maya's eyes widened in alarm, She didn't want more attention, didn't want to become the center of any more drama. But Richard's hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm, keeping her in place. Maya Thompson graduated summa cum laude from the community college while working 2 jobs to support herself and her sick grandmother. Richard continued. She speaks 3 languages fluently and has been accepted to the State University's business program for next fall. She has shown more grace, intelligence, and genuine class in 8 months than some people manage in a lifetime. The words hit the room like thunderbolts. Several of the guests looked ashamed of their earlier silence. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, recognition and respect dawning in her eyes. Victoria's face had gone from pale to deep red. "You're defending her over your own family," she hissed. "Over your own wife." "I'm defending what's right," Richard replied firmly. "Something that should never require a choice between family and conscience." Young Emma finally found her voice. "Maya helps me with my homework," she said quietly, her words carrying clearly in the hushed room. "She makes the best hot chocolate when I'm sad. She never yells or gets mad, even when I spill things." The simple testimony from a child cut deeper than any adult speech could have. It painted a picture of Maya that stood in stark contrast to the threat Victoria had imagined her to be. Dr. Morrison, one of Richard's longtime associates, stood slowly from his seat. "Richard, I think I speak for everyone here when I say that what we witnessed tonight was deeply troubling. Not Miss Thompson's behavior, which was exemplary under impossible circumstances, but the treatment she received." A murmur of agreement rippled through the remaining guests. Victoria looked around the room desperately, seeking even one ally, but found only disapproving faces staring back at her. Maya finally found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Harrison, I should go. I don't want to cause any more problems for your family." "You haven't caused any problems," Richard said firmly, "and you're not going anywhere until we get this sorted out properly." He turned to address his guests once more. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight, but I think it's best if we end the evening here. I need to have some very serious conversations with my family." The guests began filing out, but not before several of them approached Maya directly. Mrs. Patterson pressed a business card into her hand. "My daughter could use tutoring in languages," she said quietly. "Please call me." Dr. Morrison paused beside her as well. "Young lady, if you ever need a reference for anything, please don't hesitate to ask. What you showed tonight took real character." As the last guest departed, the Harrison family stood alone in their dining room. The elegant table settings now seemed like props in a play that had gone horribly wrong. Candles still flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but the warmth had gone out of the room entirely. Victoria stood isolated by her own actions, realizing perhaps for the first time that her behavior had consequences beyond her immediate desires. The respect she had taken for granted was evaporating before her eyes. Richard looked at his daughter, then at Maya, then finally at his wife. The conversation that was about to happen would determine the future of everyone in that room. "Emma, sweetheart," he said gently, "please go upstairs. Maya, would you mind staying for a few minutes? We need to talk." Maya nodded silently, still wrapped in Richard's jacket, still processing everything that had just occurred. Her life had changed forever in the span of a single evening, though she didn't yet understand how completely. The reckoning that followed would reveal truths that had been hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect household. And before the night was over, everyone would understand that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from those with power, but from those who stand up for others who have none. The torn uniform had become a symbol of something much larger than a single act of cruelty. It had exposed the fault lines running through their world, and now they would all have to decide which side they truly belonged on. The silence in the dining room felt heavy enough to crush diamonds. Richard Harrison stood between his wife and Maya, his presence creating an invisible shield that no one dared cross. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on everyone like a physical force. Victoria's breathing came in short, sharp bursts. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and she could feel the foundation of everything she had built starting to crack. The looks of disapproval from their departing guests burned in her memory like brands on her soul. "Daddy?" Emma's voice trembled from the doorway. She hadn't moved, despite being told to go upstairs. Something inside her 12-year-old heart knew this moment would change everything, and she couldn't bear to miss it. Richard's expression softened when he looked at his daughter. "Come here, sweetheart." He opened one arm while keeping the other protectively near Maya. Emma ran to him, burying her face against his side. "Why did Mom hurt Maya?" Emma whispered, but in the dead silence of the room, everyone heard her words clearly. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. How could she explain jealousy and insecurity to a child? How could she justify cruelty in terms that wouldn't destroy her daughter's faith in her? Maya shifted uncomfortably. Richard's jacket still draped around her shoulders. The fabric smelled of expensive cologne and security, but she felt like an intruder wearing it. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps I should really go. This is a family matter now." "No." Richard's voice was firm but gentle. "You're part of this conversation, Maya. What happened to you tonight happened in my home, under my roof, and I take full responsibility for allowing it to get this far." Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Allowing what to get this far?" "Richard, you're talking as if I'm the villain here, aren't you?" The words came from Emma, and they hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her own daughter was looking at her with confusion and disappointment that cut deeper than any criticism from strangers. Victoria staggered backward as if she'd been slapped. "Emma, you don't understand. Adults have complicated feelings that children can't comprehend. I understand when someone is being mean," Emma replied with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "Maya never did anything wrong. She helps me with my homework. She makes me laugh when I'm sad. She never yells or breaks things or makes people cry." Each word was like a nail in Victoria's coffin. She looked desperately at Richard, seeking some sign of support, but his eyes had gone cold in a way she'd never seen before. "Victoria," Richard said slowly, "I need you to explain to me what you thought you were accomplishing tonight. Help me understand what could possibly justify humiliating someone who has done nothing but serve our family with dignity and grace." Maya felt tears threatening again. She had spent so many months being careful, being invisible, trying not to upset the delicate balance of the household. Yet somehow, her very existence had become a problem that needed solving. "I was protecting our family," Victoria said, her voice growing stronger as desperation fueled her words. "I was protecting our marriage, our reputation, our way of life. You think I don't see the way you look at her? The way you talk to her like she's your equal?" The accusation hung between them like a live wire. Richard's jaw tightened, and Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and shame. She had noticed those moments too, had tried to discourage them without being disrespectful. "The way I treat Maya," Richard said carefully, "is the way I treat every human being who deserves respect. If you see something inappropriate in basic human decency, then the problem lies with your perspective, not my behavior." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Basic human decency? Richard, she's the help. There are boundaries, expectations, ways things are done in families like ours. You don't have intimate conversations with the staff. You don't seek their opinions on art and literature. You don't look forward to seeing them every morning like you do with her." Maya's breath caught. She had no idea Victoria had been watching so closely, cataloging every interaction, building a case against her presence in their home. The weight of that scrutiny felt suffocating. "I'm sorry," Maya whispered, finally finding her voice. "I never meant to cause problems between you and your husband. I was just trying to do my job well." "Your job," Victoria spat, "doesn't include becoming my husband's confidant or my daughter's substitute mother. That's enough." Richard's voice cracked like thunder. "Maya has been nothing but professional and appropriate. The fact that she treats Emma with kindness and engages in polite conversation with me doesn't make her a threat to our family. It makes her a decent human being." Emma tugged on her father's shirt. What does substitute mother mean? The innocent question pierced through the adult tension like a sword. Victoria's face crumpled as she realized her daughter had heard her cruel words. Maya felt sick to her stomach at the implication that she had somehow been trying to replace Emma's mother. "It means nothing, sweetheart," Richard said gently, stroking Emma's hair. "Your mother is upset and saying things she doesn't mean." But Victoria's eyes blazed with renewed fury. "Don't tell me what I mean, Richard. I mean every word. Look at her standing there in your jacket like she belongs in this family. Look how Emma runs to her defense. Look how you protect her over your own wife." The pain in Victoria's voice was real, even if her methods were inexcusable. Maya could hear the fear beneath the anger, the terror of losing everything that mattered to her. But understanding Victoria's motivation didn't excuse the cruelty of her actions. "Mrs. Harrison," Maya said softly, "I never wanted to come between you and your family. If my presence here causes you distress, I'll find another position. I don't want to be the source of conflict in your home." "See?" Victoria turned to Richard triumphantly. "Even she knows she doesn't belong here." But Richard shook his head firmly. "Maya, you're not going anywhere. You've done nothing wrong, and I won't have you punished for my wife's insecurities." The word insecurities hit Victoria like a physical blow. In all their years of marriage, Richard had never dismissed her concerns so coldly. She felt herself becoming smaller, less important, replaceable in ways that terrified her. Insecurities? Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "Is that what you call it when a wife notices her husband falling for another woman?" The accusation exploded in the room like a bomb. Emma gasped and looked between her parents with wide, frightened eyes. Maya felt the blood drain from her face as the implications of Victoria's words sank in. Richard's voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. "Victoria, you've crossed every line tonight. Maya has shown more character in these past few minutes than you've displayed in months." He turned to Maya, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. "I'm offering you a full scholarship to complete your business degree and a position in my company when you graduate. You deserve opportunities that match your potential." Maya's hands trembled as she clutched the jacket tighter. Through her tears, she managed to whisper, "Thank you for seeing my worth when others couldn't." Emma broke free from her father's side and ran to Maya, wrapping her small arms around her waist. "Please don't leave us, Maya. We need you here." Victoria stood alone in the wreckage of her own making, watching her family choose kindness over cruelty, dignity over status. The torn uniform had become a symbol of something much larger than a single moment of rage. It had revealed the true measure of everyone in that room. 6 months later, Maya walked across the graduation stage in her cap and gown, with the Harrison family cheering from the audience. Victoria had sought counseling and slowly began rebuilding the bridges she had burned. Emma still got help with her homework every evening, and Richard had gained not just a valued employee, but a reminder that respect costs nothing but means everything. Sometimes the greatest transformations come from the most unexpected places. Maya's quiet strength had changed an entire household, proving that dignity cannot be torn away, no matter how hard someone tries. The real wealth in the Harrison home had never been the crystal chandeliers or Persian rugs. It had been found in the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the cost feels too high to bear.